Conrad, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
We will start in half a minute. So I think we can start this panel. Good afternoon to all that have joined this panel discussion on exploring the memorialization and organized crime nexus transformative approach to addressing disappearance in the context of criminal governance. This panel delves deep into the issue of disappearances within the context of criminal governance in Mexico, with a particular focus on the digital realm. The panelists will first introduce the academic debate on territorial and social control by criminal groups in Latin America, making emphasis on the digital dimension. Then they will elaborate on the collaborative project El Bosque de la Esperanza, the Forest of Hope, as a case study that showcases how resistance and resilience can emerge and be mediated through digital spaces within the context of a criminal governance. My name is Konrad Gerz. I'm working for the UNODC Civil Society Unit on engaging civil society organizations in the implementation of the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime through the SE4U project, and I was very delighted to have been invited to moderate this very interesting panel today. Before we start, I want to briefly introduce today's speakers and the agenda for the session. Our first speaker is Daniel Richon-Machon. Daniel is a PhD candidate at Cambridge University's Center of Development Studies, researching public communication and social order in territories controlled by criminal groups. Drawing from qualitative fieldwork in northeastern Brazil and from different methods of digital research, he's trying to understand why criminal groups engage in public communication, in which ways digital platforms mediate those interactions, and how this relates to the governance practices. His research is supported by La Caixa Foundation and the Cambridge Trust. Previously, Daniel was a consultant for humanitarian NGOs and worked as a research assistant at the Albert Hirschman Center on Democracy. Our second speaker is Aline Wani. Aline is a co-director and co-founder of the Visibility for Transformation Lab, WIFT. Awarded the MacArthur Fellowship, Aline has specialized in mobilizing transdisciplinary methods for aesthetic and political practices in violence prevention and memorialization. As part of the fellowship, she has been working with Swiss Peace, the International Crisis Group, and the International Committee of the Red Cross on topics of transnational justice, militarization, and humanitarian approaches to searching disappeared and missing people. Previously, Aline was working as a consultant for the Civil Society Unit at UNODC. Aline studied international affairs at the University of St. Gallen and obtained a master's degree in developmental studies from the Geneva Graduate Institute. Our third speaker is Sergio Beltran Garcia. Sergio is an architect, activist, and researcher. He works closely with victims of human rights violations, their defenders, and communities to mobilize memory in political, cultural, and legal forums. He received with distinction his master's degree at Goldsmiths University of London, where he researched with forensic architecture cases of violence perpetrated by states, corporations, police, and military. He is co-director of Representare, an investigative unit that operates within the National Autonomous University of Mexico, which is a member of the Investigative Commons. And today's last speaker is Mevia Griffiths. Mevia is the co-founder and co-director of WIFT and is a PhD candidate at the University of Copenhagen in political science, merging filmmaking and social sciences research. With dual masters in documentary filmmaking from Goldsmiths University and developmental studies from Geneva Graduate Institute, she mobilizes transdisciplinary visual methods for topics of social invisibilities, violence, memory, and human rights. Today's panel discussion will start with an introduction by Daniel into the issues of disappearances within context of criminal governance, with a particular focus on the digital realm. He will introduce the academic debate on territorial and social control by criminal groups in Latin America, making emphasis on the digital dimension. Afterwards, Sergio will talk about the crisis in Mexico and will give a brief introduction into the memory landscape, introducing family collectives and their role in preserving the memory. Next, Aline will introduce the project El Bosque de la Esperanza as a case study, showcasing how resistance and resilience can emerge and be mediated through digital spaces within the context of criminal governance. She will explain the background, approach, and methodology of the project, after which Sergio will give a walkthrough of the digital platform and how the digital platform is linked to the physical sphere of memory. Afterwards, Mevia will introduce a short documentary that has been created on the project, and we will also see 2 brief clips from her footage that she has been compiling. Then Mevia will talk about the broader impacts and outcomes of the project. Finally, Sergio will conclude the panel, after which we will have time for a short Q&A session. Please type any question you might have in the Q&A tab on Zoom, as participants are not able to unmute themselves and ask questions, and we will address them at the end of the panel. I'm very much looking forward to this very interesting contributions and discussions. Therefore, I will not take any more of the time. Daniel, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. As Conrad said, my name is Daniel. I'm a PhD student at Cambridge, and I'm currently doing fieldwork in Northeastern Brazil for my PhD. My project focuses on the role of digital technologies, and especially digital platforms of communication in the exercise of social and territorial control by criminal groups. And my role today, as also put by Conrad, will be mostly introductory. We thought that since El Bosque de la Esperanza is a digital memorial that was created with communities living under criminal governance, it will be interesting at the beginning give a few notes of what do academic means when we talk about criminal governance, and to touch upon 2 topics that are especially interesting to understand the conditions in which the project was developed, and also the conditions in which the families look for their loved ones, which is the role of digital platforms in this governance and the impact that criminal governance have in forced disappearances. So that said, let's start with a few considerations on criminal governance. The academic debate on criminal governance tackles a situation that is sadly pervasive in the Latin American region, which is that of communities, mostly impoverished, mostly marginalized, that are subjected to rules of behavior, to the regulation of criminal groups. So when we talk about criminal governance, we are mostly talking about the way in which criminal groups structure social order. An order that can be brutal, can be immoral, but still a certain kind of order, right? I think that a good way to think about this, putting it in basic terms, is through 2 dynamics that appear, and this comes from my own reading on the literature, which is the dynamic of territorial control and the dynamic of social control. So when we say that criminal groups govern, they basically do these 2 things. First, criminal groups need to have access to the territory for conducting their illicit activities. And in doing so, they will engage in this dynamic of competition for territory against other groups, against state forces, etc. There is also another reason why they will want to keep territorial control, which is, for example, this symbolic value of territory for gangs, right? Like the value of turf. Let's say that's another section of it. The second point would be the second dynamic is social control, which is managing the population that live in these territories, imposing rules of behavior. Here I have this photo that I included in the presentation, where I took in a city in Brazil, in Salvador, which says, it has this graffiti that says, Prohibido roubar na quebrada, and then the name of a gang, which is the Bonde 240, the B40. I included this because this is a typical example of a rule that you find in almost any area controlled by a gang in Brazil, right? It means it's forbidden to steal in the area. And I just thought that it was a good illustration. Before moving on to the issue of digital technologies, I think that it's interesting also to flag to note 2 key characteristics of criminal governance as an academic debate. First, the idea that we're talking about a very variable phenomenon, that you have very small gangs that control a few blocks. Huge organizations like Mexican cartels are controlling that have influence over huge cities, rural territories, etc. Then you also have variability in terms of the nuance of the governance arrangements that they implement. So you have groups that have very nuanced systems of conflict resolutions with written rules, with courts, etc. Others that are more ad hoc. And of course, you have the issue of balance, right? Like there are some groups that are going to be more predatory against civilians and others, and that's something that I will go more into detail later. And then the second point that I wanted to bring here is the idea of complementarity with the state regulation. Most people that talk about criminal governance don't think about it as a complete control of criminal groups over territory and people. We are not talking about a state vacuum normally. We are talking about ways in which these groups regulate certain areas, but also the state is present. For example, in my own field experience, it's common that you enter in neighborhoods that here are called as peripheric, which are neighborhoods which are poorer and normally more influenced by these groups. And you do see this kind of like territorial control of the gang. They are present, they are like patrolling, but you also see a lot of police. You see police helicopters, you see limited social services provided by the state, you see social workers, etc. And more importantly, I think that it's more productive to think about this in terms of a different way in which the state relates to these areas rather than a complete abandonment. And I have an example that I think that is illustrative of this. I was talking with an interviewee 2 weeks ago that told me that he lives in an area which is controlled by a gang, and he was going back at nights, and there was like some people engaging on a lynching a person that was commanded by the gang because he was allegedly a rapist. So this was happening in a very public place. So someone called the police. The police arrived to the place and asked, what is going on. And when the situation is explained, what the police said informally to these people was that, okay, like this is your thing. Just don't make us write a report because that's going to be a problem for everyone. So just like take it somewhere private, or say different, disappear this person if you're going to kill him, but that's your rule, not ours. We just don't want to mess with this. So you can see how it's not that the state is not present, right? Like it's just like it acts in different ways in these kind of areas. All that says, let's go more into my thing, which is this issue of the digital space and criminal governance. I think that it's interesting to talk about this now because the El Bosque de la Esperanza is an example of how communities living under criminal governance can use digital platforms in an emancipatory way as a resistance, a way of memory. But I think that it's interesting also to show the other part, right? How criminal groups are using this to actually govern and consolidate themselves in territories in a more efficient way. So far in my research, I have identified 3 aspects of relevance for this. The first one is how digital platforms and digital technology is being used for internal governance. I have someone that told me that WhatsApp is a new working tool of crime in Brazil. And I mean, it's true, right? Like they use it quite a lot for example, commanding hits, organizing drug deliveries. There is a lot of judicial procedures that talk about these things. They also have these mapping groups, which is groups that join everyone that is in the gang or is affiliated to the gang in a certain territory. And they would just give updates on security there, like this guy, we don't know him, he's entering through this street, or the police is close to this other entrance, etc. But WhatsApp is also used internally for socialization of these groups. And something that I found extremely interesting is a category of WhatsApp group that is quite common in the area where I research in Ceará, which is the baptism group. Criminal gangs in this area baptize new members through WhatsApps. How does this work? This is basically a group that joins everyone in the region. And the person that is asking to enter would first contact someone personally, and then he will be asked to join this group, share all the information about himself, kind of like where do you live, where are your parents, etc., a photo and a video pledging alliance to the gang. So the aim here is twofold. On the one hand, this is a vetting system, so everyone is going to have his photo. If anyone in the gang have any kind of problem with him, so imagine they know that he has a relative in a rival gang or something like that, he's owing money to someone, then they will be able to just take him out. And it has another consequence, which is, I think that's even worse, which is that this is a very efficient system of social control, right? Like your photos, your information, and a video of you saying that you are from the gang is now in the phones of anyone in the network and anyone in that group. And that means that you don't have a way out, right? Like you are in the gang. The second point that I wanted to bring in terms of how do these criminal groups use the digital space to govern is this idea that I was pointing out before on territorial competition, and how the digital space also help, and the circulation of digital content also help in that regard. And here I would just like to point to how using violence doesn't only have a physical dimension, but can also be thought as a signaling strategy, right? And showing the use of violence can be also seen as a way of showing toughness to rivals, of intimidating, of showing the capacity of that group to actually engage in a confrontation and showing that they are strong, right? And this is something that criminal groups do quite a lot in my field site in terms of, throwing beef of each other, sending videos of inhuman treatment of rivals, etc. But it's also have another connotation, which is this idea of violent lobbying. This is a concept that the political scientist Benjamin Lessing coined, which is the idea of how criminal groups also try to lobby the state for policies that are more favorable. And this is also something that happens. I brought here a sample, not from my field site, but from Mexico, because I think that is actually a very interesting example. That is the case of Jalisco New Generation, which is one of the main cartels now operating in Mexico. And they are famous for using these very nuanced PR campaigns, when they have like all these very cinematographic scenery, they're all with the military fatigues, big caliber guns, and they just address the rivals, population, the state, etc. In this specific case that I put there, if I remember correctly, this was a dispute with, this was 2019, it's kind of old. It was a dispute with the Cartel de Santa Rosa de Lima in Guanajuato. And they were basically throwing beef to the other cartel. I can say that they were going to come and get them, but also they were first telling the state that like they should stay away because that was not their business, and second, reassuring the population that they were going to bring peace to the area, that they were not going to mess with the citizen, etc. And that gives me an into the third point on governance and digital space, which is the idea of social control, right? And I think that this is key and probably is the most relevant thing for what we are going to hear later of El Bosque de la Esperanza and the challenges that both the project managers and the communities face in terms of how this platform can be exploited by criminal groups. Digital platforms have become also a way in which criminal groups can exercise social control over populations that they in the areas they control. And I identified here three categories. They are interlinked with each other. The first one is maybe like the more naive one, which is organizing the community. And this happened mostly through a category that is the salve in my field site. A salve is a communicate from an organized crime group and can have many shapes and forms, but normally it's a message in a social platform, mainly instant messaging, such as WhatsApp and Telegram, and sometimes also in Instagram. And it's right, I put an example here on the right, but that's a better example for the building a narrative. But that you can have salves for practically anything. So for example, you can have a salve for the gang asking people in a certain area to stay in at night because there are going to be some kind of activity. Drugs entering, conflicts, etc. You can have salves. For example, here it's common that gangs store lottery, or better, they work with certain brands of lottery. So they will receive money from them and they will ask the community just to go to a specific brand and they will make a salve out of this. These kind of things, of more organizational stuff. Then you have other salves that are more of trying to build a narrative over things that are happening in the neighborhoods and over the use of violence. And this is the case of the one that I brought here, which is a salve from Comando Vermelho, which is one of the active organizations in the area when I'm researching, which is currently competing with another gang, which is called Massa. And they took over one of their neighborhoods. So this is one of the salves that they issued, like after taking over, or allegedly taking over, because there is also an aspect of, rumor in here. And what they say is that anyone that is related with the rebel group, with Massa, need to leave, like they are not going to be accepted in the community. And for those that are citizens, and citizen here means not involved in crime, then everything is fine, you're not going to have any problem, we are here for you. So it's kind of, like framing their presence in that space. And lastly, and I think that this is, I cannot stress enough how important is this and how much is coming up in my research, is the issue of surveillance and policing. Social networks and this kind of like circulation of images have become a perfect instrument for surveillance, for organized crime, also for police. Like they actually work in similar ways in here. The most common example, and this is something that people always talk about, is you enter into an area that is controlled by a gang. They are unsure of who you are, and who are you running with. So they will just abordar, which is like they will stop you. They will ask for your phone, and they will ask you to show them your social media, your WhatsApp, your contacts. If you have anything related with a rival gang, any contacts that are in a rival gang, anything that might lead them to think that you're collaborating with police, you might be in trouble. I've even heard several stories of people being taken and killed by gangs for having a photo doing this sign, which it's kind of like a like victory sign, but at the same time it's also the sign of Comando Vermelho. And yeah, I mean, like that's kind of like a physical way in which they exploit a digital space. But you also have a completely digital surveillance of people, right? It's also common that gang members are people like you and me. They also have social media. They go through social media of people that they know. And I've heard stories, for example, of teenagers mostly like sharing stuff on Instagram about, like parties and so on. And then like someone being in a party that is not from the neighborhood, that is from a neighborhood that is controlled by another gang. And then an Instagram friend of this person, like started threatening that person because she was running with the other gang, right? So there is all this aspect of social control that is quite important and that can be exploited at the point. This is all in terms of the digital space. And just to conclude, I wanted to give a very brief note about the issue of disappearances under criminal governance. And I think, again, this is interesting because the project is mostly addressing disappearances. And enforced disappearances doesn't happen just because these places are violent, right? Like they have a certain logic. And I think that the framework of Angélica Durán Martínez give us a good way of thinking through why people disappear under criminal governance. So, as I said before, there are different levels of violence depending on the group. But what Durán Martínez would argue is that violence is a constant in illicit markets because there are no possible legal remedies or peaceful remedies, so people just need to resort to violence. And that what we should really be thinking about is about violence visibility. So it's not about whether criminal groups use violence, but whether they show that they use violence. And she argues that this visibility is a tactical adaptation to different conditions of state competition. So what she would argue is that criminal groups are more likely to hide violence in two conditions. When law enforcement is very ostensive, militarized, and is effective, so they are afraid that if they show the violence that they are using, they are going to be repressed or taken away to the jail. And the second point, which is that in situations where there is a collaboration between state agents and organized crime groups, there is an incentive for those groups to keep things calm, or at least in appearance, to not show the violence that they are doing in order to avoid that coalition to break. And when I'm talking about invisibility and not showing, I'm talking about disappearances, right? And just to relate this with the case of Mexico, and I will leave this to Sergio, that is going to talk now, but just to give like a few main points from the National Commission of Deserts. there is now more than 112,000 missing or disappeared people in Mexico. And this number is more than likely underreported. And the data series shows two trends. One, that these surge in disappearances started with the 2006 Calderon election, which started this more militarized war on drugs style policing style in Mexico. And second, that there are spikes on disappearances with every election, meaning that there might be a political criminal interest in terms of keeping visibility low when election time happens. And I will leave my presentation here. Thank you very much for listening. Hope this was helpful. And I will leave the floor to Sergio.
Thank you, Daniel. Let me just... All right. So picking up on the exact same note that Daniel left, we're going to zoom in onto Mexico. I won't repeat many of the things that Daniel has already mentioned, but it is important to say that it is this is not something that is just isolated from a historical context, but it is actually possibly a pattern that repeats over time in Mexico. We have had several periods where there's been authoritarian regimes. The last one we can very identifiably locate is the one-party rule from for 70 years in the past century. And there's always periods of counterinsurgency or internal armed conflict. And this is what most researchers agree on, is what we observe in Mexico, at least since 2006. And what we see is an increase in violence, as Daniel was mentioned. Going back to what he was mentioning, there are now 112,595 people that have been identified as disappeared by the National Search Commission. But as Daniel said, this is underreported. Most of the family collectives that search for their family members dare to say that the real number must be twice or even 3 times as large. And it's important to say that Mexico is right now living a context in which the federal government is trying to manipulate these numbers by creating a new survey with no clear methodology, in comparison to this number that has very clear methodology set out by law. So the memory of the disappeared is currently under threat. It is quite possible that in the next few months, we will see this number drastically reduced with no clear methodology showing why this is happening. Now, in resistance of these different operations by both organized crime and government, and it's important to stress that organized crime in Mexico is not inseparable from government or from government institutions or government officials. There is quite a very generous, blurry space between both. So families have to resist both of these forces and their entanglements. And in order to do that, most of them have organized around collectives. There are more than 100 collectives of people who, or families who further disappeared in Mexico. And they are really the ones who know on the ground and are sensing the dynamics that produce the disappearance. Now, I need to talk about memory's role in front of this, because it is truly the memory it is the love that families have for their disappeared and the memories they have of them that really is pushing El Bosque de la Esperanza as a platform. Now, I am an architect who studies memory, so like what I do is I really focus on researching why memorials have failed to fulfill the promise of never again, and even ask if it is memorials' job to do that. So time after time, since post-World War II, we've been building these memorials and monuments to different grave human rights violations, and we see time and time again that they repeat. Currently, right now, very, very clearly, grave human rights violations are occurring in many wars around the world. So my question as an architect is, why do we build schools? We build schools to educate, we build hospitals to heal, but somehow we think that memorials are meant to just help us remember. And there's a problem when thinking along these lines when it comes to Mexico, because the government, for example, this is a memorial to victims of femicide in northern Mexico, where in the city of Juárez, Ciudad Juárez, where there's been a very tragic process of femicides that has been going on since the early 90s. And in 2009, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights ordered Mexico to repair the victims. And among those reparations was the the need to create a memorial. Now, this memorial was not created in consultancy with the victims. It was only the government choosing an artist out of their own will and producing this. In the end, this memorial not only did very little or next to nothing. It is not possible to verify if this memorial has had a role in reducing femicides or the violence that leads to femicides, but it did re-victimize the victims because they were ignored by this process. Their memory was suppressed by the government. This is another example of such operations of the Mexican government to not only perpetrate violence on the bodies, minds, feelings, and livelihoods of people, but on their memory as well. This is the memorial to the victims of violence in Mexico that was built by the government of Felipe Calderón in 2006. And well, it was actually completed in 2012, sorry. And this was also a process that was meant to be very horizontal, where a large number of victims would participate all around the world. And in the end, it was the government that decided to choose a random architect, and in a very suspicious bid that lasted for only 1 month. And they produced this memorial, its shape and everything, in only in only a few weeks without participation of victims. So in the end, this memorial is built, but no one really relates to it or uses it. In fact, it is a very sore reminder of how the government turns its back on the needs that victims ask for, and how memory is weaponized against them to silence them. And there are many other examples like this memorial of the earthquake, the devastating earthquake in 1985 in Mexico. And even like there was another earthquake in 2017 where the government again ignored the petitions of victims of the earthquake, who were not really demanding for a memorial. They were demanding for their homes to be rebuilt, for certainties to be established institutionally, for them to be able to recover from the socially constructed disaster. But the government decided to focus on just producing a memorial. So this is a pattern that I've seen and researched and happens over and over. It is a form of dispossession of memory, in the sense that it is not only governments appropriating the memory of tragic events, but they're actually dispossessing it in the sense that they're taking away the means that victims use to be able to try to get some form of repairs. So to me, and this is part of the ethos of El Bosque de la Esperanza, to remember is never enough. It does not mean never again. So what do we do? There's several texts, but I want to focus on just one that was by the Special Rapporteur on Justice, Truth, Reparation, and Repetition of the UN. He put out a report in summer of 2020, where he mentions that memory is the 5th pillar of transitional justice, but it is a transversal pillar. And to me, as an architect, what I see is that if truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition are pillars, and memory is a transversal pillar, then memory must be built on top of these pillars. And this is why I believe that memory without truth is further lies, memory without justice is impunity, without reparation is further damage, and without non-repetition is oblivion. We need to work with all of these 5 in simultaneous in order to try to aspire for a memory that allows access for victims to their reparations and to recover and to justice, and all of these very important elements. So the mandate of my work is to build spaces for memory, reparation, and non-repetition. And to end in this intervention, I've kind of condensed it down to this distinction between monuments and memorials, in the sense that a monument, like the ones that I showed you, is an object that occupies space in order to just remember the past, whereas memorials create space in order to remember the past in the present and act in order to avoid its repetition in the future. So in one way, the monument is focusing on the object, and memorial is creating space envelopments, places where people are the carriers of memory, not the objects. And this is exactly what the Bosque is about. This is where I end my first intervention.
Thank you so much, Sergio. And hi to everyone. Thank you so much for that opportunity. To maybe present myself quickly, I'm the co-director and the co-founder of the Visibility for Transformation Lab, together with Maevia. And together with Sergio and Maevia, I'm part of the project team for the Bosque de la Esperanza project. You've already heard a little bit about the Bosque de la Esperanza. I will quickly tell you and explain a little bit more what the project is. Sergio, I don't know if you could maybe switch the slides. Thank you so much. Thank you. So the Bosque de la Esperanza is a collaborative long-term project. It exactly actually seeks to improve the access to the right to memory, as Sergio has mentioned before. And it does so through navigating across different regions in Mexico, with the ultimate goal to make memory accessible throughout Mexico. Concretely, it proposes a self-constructing, immersive and virtual memorial for victims of enforced disappearance in Mexico, but thereby also keeping in mind the different patterns of different experiences of disappearances, allowing people that, for example, have found their missing loved ones either alive or unfortunately not, to also be part of the project, as well as also including people that are either organized in collectives, as many people do, but then also a lot of people don't have access to be part of such a collective, depending on the context where they live and in which community. So the project also aims to include those people, individuals and other families to be part of the project. The project generally is assisted by transdisciplinary aesthetic approaches, such as Sergio's work as an architect, and then also through coding and film, which maybe we'll tell you a bit more later on. And exactly to synthesize a bit the mission and the idea of the Bosque de la Esperanza is that it endeavors to weave together the trees of hopes. So the trees of hope, it's a practice that has been present in Mexico and also across many different continents and different countries, where families hung up ribbons on trees with usually the name and a photo of the person that has gone missing in their communities, in the spaces where they live. And this has been a practice in Mexico as well. It actually, the first tree that was where those ribbons were hung up was in 2015 in Torreón, Coahuila, in the state of Coahuila. And through that, it has been a practice that then spread throughout Mexico. So the idea of the Bosque de la Esperanza is really to weave together those trees of hope through a virtual platform, and through that protect those trees. It's important to mention that a lot of those trees have been subject to aggressions, destruction by either governmental parts or non-governmental parts. Even in the small periods that we've been working with the collectives now throughout the project phase of this year, trees have been attacked. Also, one of the families that we collaborated with, unfortunately, one of their trees has been attacked by the government. So there's really this necessity to protect those trees through the possibility to have a virtual space where they can basically safeguard their memories. What is also important to mention about the project, through the immersive technologies that we are using, we endeavor to really create a way to rehumanize the victims, and also to kind of create a shift in perception and empathy for non-affected audiences or people that are not directly involved in the problem or not really touched by the humanitarian crisis. It's sometimes hard to imagine that nevertheless there are so many people that have gone missing and disappeared, yet there's still a lot of different levels of understandings within the Mexican society and also on an international level when it comes to having empathy for what is happening and having targeted ways to be actionable in those spaces. So the Bosque de la Esperanza really tries to weave together those different ways of action in that way. We started collaborating a bit more than a year ago so I've been working with different collectives for the research I have been conducting as part of my thesis, and so has Sergio. He has been working with concretely Hasta Encontrarte, which is one of the collectives that we are collaborating now as well, and they reached out to actually create such a virtual platform. So it's important to mention that it's something that the necessity for such a space came from collectives, and we were approached by them to support them in this endeavor. To maybe explain a bit more how the Bosque de la Esperanza works. So we were conducting a research phase over the past year to really see and kind of assess the commemorative needs of the different families. And for that, we were working with over 100 people across different states in Mexico. We were working in Veracruz, on the Gulf of Mexico, and then in Baja California, which is the very north to the border of the US, and then also in Guanajuato, which is quite close to Mexico City. And it was important for us to choose particularly very different regions with family collectives that vary in their size and also in terms of their political and social capital when it comes to having connections to the government and when it comes to having their needs attended by the government as well, to really get a broad idea of the different commemorative needs. And also it was important to have different regions in a way, because the patterns of disappearances actually vary a lot. And also the actors involved and the kind of general trajectories that are linked to the disappearances vary a lot in those 3 different regions. And maybe last to mention, we worked with 5 different collectives in those 3 different states. And through that, we kind of set up a research that was departed into 3, essentially 2 phases and then a phase in between, to really assess the commemorative needs together with the family in a collaborative way. As you can see on the slide, we started at the beginning of last year with really basically mapping out the different risks, doing the background research that was necessary to be able to then navigate in those different states, and also to create the contact with the different families and to see how the first research phase would unfold. And then the first research phase really was focused on assessing the commemorative needs of the families. We did that through very virtual, very integrative ways of having workshops, where we had a very strong emphasis on the collaborative kind of focus of the project overall, really giving them all the options that they could think of when it came to having such a virtual memorial created. To maybe give you a little bit of an insight, what came out there was really that they wanted, for example, to have the possibility to upload photos, video material, favorite recipes of the people that have been disappeared, but also insights to the travels they had done together before the person disappeared, favorite playlists on Spotify, for example, as well. So those were all the assessments that we did as part of that first research phase. But also, as I had mentioned previously, we did a risk assessment concretely of how basically memory work in a virtual space could look in spaces of criminal governance. I had worked on criminal governance and kind of the work of family collectives in those contexts before. And it was part of our risk assessment that we had done previously to starting the project, but it was very important to kind of co-create that together and get ideas from the families that are obviously living it in their everyday life, to really take that into account to then come up with a final design of the platform. To validate that design, we really kind of made sure to have a constant exchange with the families, even after the first research phase. We kind of went back to looking at the results that we had gotten from our research phase, and were in contact with Data Cívica, which is a big NGO in Mexico working on human rights issues through technological approaches, essentially. And they've been working with us on the software development for the virtual space. So in that process, we were in very close contact with the families, but also Data Cívica, to kind of translate the different necessities and into actual factable, into the actual virtual platform. And then in a second phase, which was now in August, we went back to the different communities and the different collectives and the different regions in Mexico, and tested the virtual platform that we had already started designing. And to maybe mention one of the very important things that was came out as a result from the first phase, that was that a lot of families actually don't have access to internet. So we created a chatbot on WhatsApp. And WhatsApp, especially all the metadata in Mexico, is for free. So it would be accessible to all the families to actually upload everything that they wanted to be part of the virtual platform without them having entered another platform for which they would actually need internet. And also it was very clear and evident that it would be easier for them to use a platform that they are already very much acquainted with, which WhatsApp is the main platform that they're using. So we created a chatbot that we then tested in the second phase with the families as well. So on the one side, really showing the actual output of the potential website, but then also the chatbot, testing that with them, and then really getting those insights again to be influencing the final output that we're now working on and will be published soon. Sergio will give you a small overview of the platform afterwards. To maybe just link all that together, so the idea, and I hadn't mentioned that concretely before, is really that families that would be able to basically scan the ribbons that are hung on the trees through a QR code and access the virtual platform through the QR code. And so on the sides of creating and co-creating the virtual platform, we're also working on a physical component for the memorial, which are the listones, so the ribbons that have already been used by many families in many different spaces before, and creating those ribbons with the photos of them as well. You will see a photo afterwards as well that Sergio will show you. Maybe now a little bit more about the risk assessment that I had mentioned before. Sergio, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide, please. So here again, maybe you can see the map of the locations of the different collectives that you're working with, and then in the next slide, you will get a small overview of the main kind of key takeaways from the risk assessment that we did. As I had mentioned before, it's communities living in very clear context of criminal governance. That means actually, like for a lot of them that are involved in search activities, that also means negotiating their access to those searching sites in an everyday kind of way, negotiating those accesses with criminal groups in order to actually conduct their search activities. As one clear manifestations of the lived kind of realities behind those contexts of criminal governance that they're living in. But then again, as I had mentioned, it's very different ways that manifests in those different 3 regions. And it was very interesting to sit down and really see what kind of risks for them were the most important when it came to using such an online platform, also based on their previous experiences of using social media in those contexts and having actual particular risks associated with those social media platforms. And so maybe name a few of them. Of course, there are cybersecurity risks involved. A lot of them had mentioned data breaches or hacking attempts by criminal groups or other malicious actors in a virtual space. But then also extortion. Actually, a lot of people were very worried about that. Basically the access and the very systematized access to such a platform for criminal groups would allow a very targeted way to extortion family members. On the one side, like the traditional schemes of extortion, but then also it's been very common that families have been threatened, or then again also have been contacted directly by people and basically tell it that they were told that they would need to pay a certain ransom to get their missing loved one back. Even though that was only a scam, obviously people usually pay the money. And so it was a very clear scheme that has been used on them in the past. And they were scared that such a platform would basically enable the criminal actors to use the platform in a very systematized way to target those people. Then it was also, of course, mentioned very often that they could be used for like a way to have hate speech and also harassment in those virtual spaces, and as a tool of surveillance. Then also as an informant network to really have criminal organizations enabled them to establish strategic informant networks with victim groups or also collectives that put community members at risk if they are suspected of cooperating with authorities and other parties when it comes, for example, to justice mechanisms, etc. There were trust and privacy concerns that were echoed, and then also a censorship and a content control in that way, that the criminal groups would essentially kind of censor the content of the platform or suppress dissident or conceal their activities. And then there were legal and regulatory risks that of operating in the virtual memory platform, especially in regions with complex legal landscapes that were mentioned. I will leave it at this. I think it will now, Sergio will take over and quickly run you through the platform, where hopefully it will get a bit clearer on how the virtual platform actually will look like, and also the chatbot. So thank you so much, and I will hand over to Sergio.
I'll be very quick because we're almost out of time. We need to make space for Maevia. And so essentially, just want to show you very quick how the, wait a second, how the, so basically we need to show you like how the chatbot actually works, like that it exists. We won't be able to run through an entire workflow because there are several task flows for this project. Just give me a second. I already had this set up. Here we go. All right. So this is WhatsApp. Okay, again. And we need to put ourselves in the shoes of someone who is using this, one of the parents who are looking for their disappeared, and the chatbot again is the input device for the platform. So through the chatbot, there's this automated workflow where people can. Oh, sorry, this keeps happening. Well, sorry. Actually, for privacy reasons, I cannot show you. I thought this was going to work, but I will show you the platform. But the idea is that the chatbot asks questions over and over of what is your disappeared, who are they, what is their gender expression, when were they disappeared, if they were found, then who found them, where, when, and upload media. They can, as Aline mentioned, they can upload texts, images, voice notes, links, etc. All sorts of media, so that families can effectively keep alive the memory of their disappeared and resist these attempts to erase them. So when you get to the platform, what you do is that you see all of the trees that exist. Some of these are tests, so please do not share this link. But like, for example, here we have the copy of, or the avatar of the tree that is in Veracruz. Here is the one that is in Irapuato. As you can see, they already have ribbons on them because these are the ribbons, each one representing a disappeared person, where the families deposit their memories. And for example, there's a test one I did in Mexicali here. And when you get in, you zoom in and you can see more information. Again, this platform is still in development. It's about 50% in its process. But once you zoom in to the branches, you can actually see the different ribbons. And for example, this is an example. And once you go inside, that is when you see like this blog space where people can actually fully develop the memories of who they're looking for. There's also search functions, put in there so that people can easily find people, trees, and collectives. And yeah, I want to stop here to make space that we have left for my idea.
Thank you, Sergio. Yeah, so aware of the time, I'll try and be kind of concise. Sergio, do you mind sharing the slides? Would you want me to do it?
Wait, maybe if you can do it now, like go ahead, because like I need to open again the slides accidentally.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'll try and be concise about all of this. So like I was presented before, I've been collaborating with Sergio and Aline, and I've been looking more at the visual part and the research throughout this project. So if we look at it, we've actually really had a strong method in transdisciplinarity as a tool for really the visualization of this topic, which is a very important one, as you've seen throughout the other presentations today. And this really brings forth these people, these stories, to combat the stigmatization and the criminalization that really intensifies their trauma and their situation of victimhood. It also creates a new status where one can have a better kind of notion of self-representation in their sense of their experiences, in the way that they can connect to others, and also reckon parts of these traumatic experiences as a collective in more of a systematic lens, which brings out a little bit this notion that they're alone dealing with this violence. Another thing that I think is interesting and important to mention is that these spaces, especially the digital space, provide something quite unique in terms of memorial. Like Sergio was saying before, there's this tendency of doing big statues, big, memorials that take up this space, but that is very fixed, right? And it's very much what we're used to in almost like a gravestone, something that is literally fixed in stone. So here we have something actually on the contrary that is super adaptable, super malleable to the needs of the people, because we're not talking about death specifically, we're talking about disappearances. So there's something emotionally as well, and in terms of the process that the people are going through, that is actually very different. And so that format also allows for that. On top of that, so we've decided to make a short documentary film that I'm directing, and basically the main theme is going to be looking at disappearances through absence. So it's this idea of the absence of the loved one, but also this representing of the lack of existence, so the longing and the limbo, and which very much resonates as well with the legal system and the impunity that these families have to go through. In terms of the way that the documentary would be structured, very quickly, we would have three main parts, one more based on the personal stories, a second part based more on interviews with experts in human rights, forensic crisis, on forced disappearances, activists. And then the third part would be including some shots of the workshops that we've done in the research phase and the implementation phase of El Bosque de la Esperanza as an example of how memory can be done, can be achieved through these projects like this one, and how it is important in this context of violence towards some kind of notion of transitional justice potentially, or peacemaking at least. So there's a few key takeaways that have come out from all of this, especially through the one-to-one interviews that I've been doing with the women. That has really created a strong sense of trust building with them, and very much connected their voices and the medium to a wider audience about the issue, which they were very clear that was also an important aspect for them to be able to share on that level. So very quickly, I'm going to try and share two clips. I don't know if we have time for both, but let me at least show you.
We still have 15 more minutes in the panel.
Okay, perfect. Then, so the first one that I'm sharing is a quick overview of the project, and there's images of what Aline was saying, Sergio, about the creation of the memorial and the methodology. And then the second one is a video that we did for the 30th of August, which was the International Day of the Victim of Enforced Disappearances. And you'll see there's a very strong message from the part of the family to protect the trees, to be there together, united against the stigmatization and the violence that could be also done to the actual memorial. So I'll show the first video now. Hopefully it's going to work.
Memoria para mí es buscar a mi papá. Memoria es escuchar todas las experiencias de todas las personas que buscan a sus familiares.
So that's one, and I'll quickly share the second one.
Hola, buenas tardes. Nosotros somos el colectivo Hasta Encontrarte.
Somos el colectivo Solecito de Veracruz.
Somos el colectivo Una Nación Buscándote de Tijuana, Baja California.
Pertenezco al colectivo de Siguiendo Tus Pasos de acá de la ciudad de Ensenada.
Estamos en este árbol, lo nombramos como el árbol de la esperanza y lo adoptamos para visibilizar la crisis de desapariciones que se viven en todo el país, que supera los 100,000 registros de personas desaparecidas.
Estamos aquí, el grupo de Madres Unidas y Fuertes, abajo de este mezquite, en representación de todos nuestros hijos desaparecidos.
Y quiero invitar a toda la ciudadanía a que conozca nuestro árbol.
Que se sumen a cuidarlo, a protegerlo.
Porque guarda la memoria de nuestros tesoros.
Queremos hacer una invitación a toda la ciudadanía que tiene un familiar desaparecido, a todas las colectivas.
Este árbol es para todos.
Tiene raíces en todo el país.
Invitamos a otros colectivos y a otras familias a que se sumen a este proyecto.
Todos tienen la libertad de venir a colgar un listón
para que la memoria se siembre en todo nuestro país.
Y todos tenemos el derecho de participar en este ejercicio de memoria, que de hecho es un derecho humano.
Al Estado mexicano, hablando de los 3 niveles de gobierno, hoy les venimos a decir que
estamos visibilizando la problemática. Estamos luchando diario.
Que si ya falló en la protección de nuestros hijos desaparecidos, no falle ahora descuidando este árbol.
Está unido a un bosque de la esperanza a nivel nacional.
El día de hoy les pedimos que por dignidad y respeto, que dejen a un lado las diferencias políticas y que comprendan que este bosque no está solo y que si atacan el árbol de cualquiera de los municipios, atacan un bosque a nivel nacional conformado por cientos de familias que nos une un solo dolor y un solo objetivo.
¿Por qué les buscamos?
Porque los amamos.
Si atacan un árbol,
atacan el bosque de todas.
Porque vivos se los llevaron,
¡vivos los queremos!
That was for the visuals, to have a bit of a better idea. Okay, hopefully you can see the slides again. Okay. So very quickly, as a final note, so basically, I think it's hard right now to really have a clear view of all the impacts and outcomes, because obviously we're still in the process. We're finishing up a big phase now, but the idea is for this to continue, so things are going to be changing a lot. But basically, we're looking at how these outcomes will be seen through a better access to the right to memory in many ways across Mexico. And also in many ways see this as a peace-building effort towards restoring the social fabric of communities by connecting them through this forest of hope in many ways. And then also fostering resilience, because it's a very strong way for them to share their resistance strategies. And again, like I was saying, feel less alone in this violence and really have this notion of unity around the forest of hope. Also, as Aline was mentioning, there's a real attempt in rehumanizing the victims. So give identity and a voice back to the victims by visualizing the struggle, and very much fostering empathy through this immersive experience towards, again, a rehumanization, but for non-affected audiences as well, that maybe don't understand the phenomenon as well. So this visualizing of the struggle potentially can really help to put faces on these numbers and challenge again this individualization of the violence and really shift this accountability and responsibility among a wider society and wider political implications, and not just for the family to carry alone. So that's it on my end. I think potentially now we can have a few minutes for questions.
There's some final thoughts. Just it's very important for us to tell everyone who's attending us and listening to us. Thank you for listening to us. But And just to insist that behind this project, there are 94 families, there are 6 collectives, there's the memory of 101 disappeared persons, and we are committed to around 300 more families that are part of these collectives who are waiting for us to fundraise in order to be able to complete this project. So we have like very big plans. We already showed you this map of who we are working with. So I just, on a final note, we would very much appreciate your support if you're interested in pushing these sort of forms of research and action. If you can take a screenshot of this, and I'll just leave it there while we take your questions.
Thank you very much, everyone, for this very, very interesting contributions. We now have around 7-8 minutes left for questions. So please feel free to post any questions that you might have in the Q&A box on Zoom, and we will try to answer them. As we don't have any questions yet, I will take the liberty and ask a first question myself. So you mentioned that the physical trees are under a certain threat, and that you also identified cybersecurity threat to these spaces of memory. How do you ensure that these ribbons that are created through this WhatsApp chat function are actually disappeared people and not used as a way to discredit this space of memory online? Thank you.
If I can, I'd like to take a stab at that question, Konrad. It's a very good question. We believe that the key is that we aren't just putting out a platform that is isolated, in the internet, but we've learned through past experiences of similar experiments on memory that it is really key to visit the spaces where the families live, where they inhabit, where they resist, and establish relationships of trust and working directly with them. If that is successful, then the spring of the memory is truly the collectives, and we have the legitimacy, or the project has a legitimacy to be able to hold that in public. In contrast to many other projects which do perform those forms of what I consider memory violence, which come from the government and are very identifiable to come from like official projects. So we think that this is the key to be able to resist those forms of like appropriating or dispossessing memory. And also, again, as Maevia said, this is not fixed in stone. It is continuously moving. It is continuously mobile. So the fact that this platform is alive and is constantly materials being uploaded to it, we think validates also that it is not something that is a fixed message, which is something very characteristic of forms of memory that try to, encapsulate violence and isolate it from the fabric of political and historical movement. And well, yeah, I'll leave it there. There was something else, but sorry.
Thank you. And as a follow-up question, if I may, how important is the physical aspect of the spaces of memory? Would a purely online space of memory work? Because when I remember when I saw memorials that were very impressive to me, of course, as a visitor, not as an affected person, these were always physical spaces. Would an online space for memory work on its own? To everyone, thanks.
I mean, I would gladly, but I would like to make space for someone else.
I'm happy to go if it's okay, Maevia. I think what we learned from past experiences is really that, also mentioning again that the Árboles de la Esperanza has been a practice that has been used in many different communities in Mexico and also worldwide. It was important to link it something that was already existing in that way. That families are used and that they came up by themselves, essentially, which is the same for the virtual platform, but really having it basically linking the efforts that they've already been working on before and linking that to a new platform that they're maybe not acquainted as before. And then also keeping in mind that the usage, I think there will be families that will only have the virtual platform available because they're actually not available. It's not possible to them to have a physical space, because it's either not allowed or they don't have the access to an actual tree in a community. But then on the other hand, there will be people that will most likely only continue to working the physical component. So I think it was very important for us to take the different needs into consideration and making the spaces of memory as accessible as possible to everyone, depending on their preferred desire of how to use such a space of memory.
Thank you. And if I continue, what has been the feedback so far from the Family Collective on this digital space of memory? Probably, you know, them having mostly experience with this physical space. How have they, you know, accepted this? How have they used this so far? You know, the platform is only, you know, in its beginning, but what has been the feedback so far?
I mean, I can say just a few words, but I don't know, Sergio, if you want to add. But yeah, I think at least for what we've seen this summer when we went back with the listones that were printed with the faces of their loved ones on it, it was, of course, a very strong moment. I think especially after the research and co-creation period that we had done, to suddenly see something, again, physical that they could have in their hands and put up in the tree, it made everything suddenly kind of make sense, right? And bringing everything together in a very concrete way. So yeah, a lot of emotions, very touched and very determined to put it up, to make it visible, to have it in the main squares. They were extremely proactive about it. And for the digital part, we were testing the platform. It was still in the making, so there were some bits that were maybe a bit still difficult to grasp. But I think most of them got very excited and like got to understand even more how this could have an impact when scrolling and someone seeing, you know, the name of their son, you know, spouse, daughters or whoever on the platform. So I think it was a beautiful way of kind of combining both. And so I think, yeah, everyone's excited for the next steps.
Thank you very much. And I mean, I will follow with this project, and I'm also very excited where this goes. I think we will end the panel discussion now as we're running out of time. So thank you again for all this very interesting interventions and for your participation and sharing your amazing work. And of course, also thank you for the organizers of the OC24 Conscious and Organized Crime for creating the space and letting these experts here sharing their work and